Hi there, this is Susan Omer. This week in our London Book and Film Club, we're going to focus on the first film that Hitchcock directed in London, after he directed two other films in Germany. In this video, I want to talk about Hitchcock's work in London leading up to The Lodger and the influence of London's film culture on his first English feature.
The Lodger is considered the first film we would call Hitchcockian. It has a central mystery, themes of guilt and innocence, and characters whose moral situations are ambiguous. The film reflects Hitchcock's personal interest in mysteries and in London itself, the city where he lived until he moved to Hollywood in 1939. The Lodger allowed Hitchcock to build on the expertise he gained by working his way up in the film industry. Hitchcock was born in Leytonstone, northeast of the city, and the town decided to commemorate its famous son by decorating its underground station with mosaic tiles that celebrate scenes from his films. You can see the mosaic for North by Northwest on the right here, and the link to images of the rest is at the bottom. On the left is a tile based on a photograph of his father with either him or his older brother on the horse. The mosaic makes it look much more like him. His family was Catholic, and his parents sent him to Jesuit schools. He said later that this experience left him with a strong sense of fear and guilt. Even as a boy, he loved movies and began reading industry trade papers as a teenager. Hitchcock's father, William, owned a grocery store and bought many of the items he sold there at the produce markets in Covent Garden. Covent Garden is the setting for Hitchcock's 1972 film Frenzy, which you might also want to look at as an example of his film set in London. Frenzy contains some pretty graphic scenes of violence and was the first Hitchcock film to receive an X rating, so I'm going to leave it to you to watch. It would probably be R-rated today. Frenzy was shot on location in Covent Garden, and it's nostalgic now because the produce stands and also the flower markets that we can see in My Fair Lady have been replaced by the Apple Store and restaurants. One of the key scenes in Frenzy takes place at 3 Henrietta Street, which you see here on the left, and that building still exists. There's a Hitchcock walking tour of London that spends a lot of time in this area, and I highly recommend it when we can all travel again. Hitchcock attended a technical school where he studied mechanics, and his first job was with a company that manufactured wires and cables. He worked there through World War I. When he was 18, he began taking art classes, and his employer moved him to its advertising department, where he wrote and designed publicity materials. I say all this to show that this early work and training gave Hitchcock a solid grounding in technical as well as artistic areas. He wanted to work in film, and when he learned in 1920 that an American film company was going to open a studio in London, he took his advertising portfolio to them and got a job designing title cards. Title cards, or intertitles, are the words that appear between the images in silent films that tell us the dialogue or plot. Over the next 7 years, Hitchcock worked for several major film studios in London, whose names you see here, and he learned everything he could. He wrote scripts, worked as an assistant director, and learned editing. He was able to watch some of the most famous artists in the UK at these studios. Within 5 years, he was directing his first feature film. Hitchcock truly worked his way up in film and was praised throughout his life for his detailed knowledge of filmmaking. One of the many benefits of living in London was that Hitchcock had access to a wide range of films, not only the American films that screened in commercial cinemas, but more innovative art films from France, Germany, Denmark, and the Soviet Union. We know that Hitchcock attended the screenings of the London Film Society, which was founded in 1925 with the support of the famous names that you see here. Film societies in the 1920s expanded their audience's awareness of films in much the same way we do through our book club and that the Browning Cinema does on campus. I've gone through the Society's programs for us, and you can see the kinds of films they screen, even Mickey Mouse cartoons. One member of the Society's Executive Council was Ivor Montagu. who was responsible for bringing Soviet directors such as Pudovkin and Eisenstein to London, directors whose work greatly influenced Hitchcock. Hitchcock learned from many smart and talented people, and you see two of them here. Ivor Montagu from the Film Society was instrumental in saving the lodger. You'll remember that Hitchcock began his film career by designing titles, and the story goes that there were too many of them in the first cut of The Lodger, so the producer asked Montagu to step in and trim the titles. It is said that his pruning of the intertitles speeded the pace of the film and saved it from being relegated to the dustbin. We often give Hitchcock all the credit for his films, but in many cases, he collaborated with experienced and talented screenwriters. For example, Elliot Stannard on The Lodger. Stannard had worked as a screenwriter on more than 80 films since 1914. He began in the film industry when Hitchcock was a teenager, and he is credited on 7 other silent films that Hitchcock directed. Stannard also published thoughtful articles on the distinctive features of film as a medium, something that also interested Hitchcock, and he stressed the importance of having a central theme and atmosphere, qualities that we find in The Lodger. Hitchcock met his future wife, Alma Revell, in 1921, shortly after he began working in film. His biographers like to point out that she was senior to him in the studio hierarchy. Her father had worked in the industry, and she began her career in film at 16. Alma had worked as a writer, production manager, and editor by the time Hitchcock asked her to work with him when he began directing. She was his collaborator all the way through his career, particularly in developing scripts for The Lady Vanishes, Shadow of a Doubt, and Rebecca, for example. Hitchcock praised her throughout his life for her talent and support. By 1926, when The Lodger was released in London, Hitchcock had become famous, as you can see in this article from the fan magazine Picture Goer. I don't know if he was, in fact, the youngest director in the world, but you can see the admiration the magazine had for Hitchcock. As we've seen, Hitchcock worked hard to learn about film and had the opportunity to collaborate with some of the best in the business. The Lodger was his first London film, and I look forward to talking about it with you. Thank you.